For nearly a century, the Academy Awards have been framed as a celebration of cinematic excellence. Yet the Oscars have always been more than gold statues and applause. They are a cultural mirror, reflecting who Hollywood chooses to honor, who it hesitates to embrace, and who it quietly keeps at a distance. The Oscar moments that truly matter are not simply shocking or emotional. They are the ones that exposed contradictions, shifted public conversations, and forced an industry built on image control to confront race, power, gender, and representation. Time and again, progress arrived late, carefully managed, and only when it no longer threatened the system granting it. Almost every historic Oscar moment was met with thunderous applause and followed by a price paid away from the spotlight. Careers stalled, doors closed, and for some, making history became another form of confinement. So, when history is announced from the stage, who is really being welcomed into the room? Does recognition signal real change, or merely the appearance of it? Tonight, we revisit 15 Oscar moments that didn't just make headlines, they made history. Beginning with a victory delivered in a room that never truly intended to accept the woman who earned it. On the 29th of February 1940, inside the coconut grove of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, history was made in a way that almost feels unreal in hindsight. Hattie McDaniel won Best Supporting Actress for playing Mammy in Gone with the Wind, becoming the first African-American to receive an Academy Award. The room applauded, the industry congratulated itself, and for a brief moment, it looked like a door had finally opened. But what kind of progress is it when the building itself doesn't want you inside? The Ambassador Hotel was segregated. McDaniel was initially not even guaranteed entry to the ceremony, and only after producer David O. Selznick intervened was she allowed in. Even then, she wasn't permitted to sit with her white co-stars like Vivien Leigh and Clark Gable. Instead, she was placed at a small table against a far wall present, but separated, honored, but not included. If this was Hollywood's highest recognition, why did it come with a seating chart that still enforced exclusion? When McDaniel accepted the Oscar, her speech was brief and remarkably composed. She called it one of the happiest moments of her life, and she expressed a hope that she would always be a credit to her race and to the motion picture industry. Yet behind that grace sat a lifetime of pressure and contradiction. Born in 1893 to former slaves, McDaniel had fought her way into an industry that offered black performers almost nothing beyond stereotypes. And even as white Hollywood limited her to mammy roles, she also faced criticism from the NAACP and the black press for taking them. Her blunt reply became famous. She said she would rather play a maid than be one. It was an answer that revealed the brutal math of survival, but it also underlined the paradox of that night. Hollywood crowned her, yet kept her at the margins. The statue said history, while the room said not equal. And once the applause faded, what exactly changed for her? The aftermath is the part Oscar montages rarely include. McDaniel continued to face discrimination long after her win. When she died in 1952, her final wish to be buried in Hollywood Cemetery was denied because of the cemetery's whites-only policy. And the Oscar itself, which she left to Howard University, later disappeared, becoming a haunting symbol of both recognition and erasure. So, was this breakthrough a real turning point, or a carefully managed moment that allowed the Academy to celebrate progress without surrendering power? Hattie McDaniel made history in a room that didn't want her. That is what makes this first Oscar moment both pioneering and painfully incomplete, a victory that proved excellence could be seen even when equality still could not. By 1973, Marlon Brando was no longer just a movie star. His performance as Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather had reasserted his dominance and positioned him as a cultural force. So when his name was announced as Best Actor at the 45th Academy Awards, the audience erupted only to fall into stunned confusion moments later. Instead of Brando, a young Apache woman in traditional dress stepped onto the stage. Her name was Sacheen Littlefeather, and she explained that Brando would not accept the award. The reason, she said, was Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans and the ongoing standoff at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Applause mixed with boos. For the first time, the Oscar stage had been transformed from a celebration into a confrontation. But was this a bold act of conscience or a line Hollywood was unwilling to let anyone cross? The context mattered. Wounded Knee was not distant history. It was unfolding in real time, with members of the American Indian movement facing federal agents. By linking Hollywood's screen portrayals to real-world violence and erasure, Brando collapsed the industry's comfortable separation between entertainment and responsibility. Yet the backlash was immediate. Littlefeather was reportedly warned that she would be removed or arrested if she spoke for more than 60 seconds. A longer statement Brando had prepared, later published in the New York Times, never reached the audience. How much truth was Hollywood willing to tolerate, and who decided where the limit was? The aftermath exposed the cost of that moment. Littlefeather endured harassment, professional isolation, and years of misrepresentation. Backstage, the tension was so high that John Wayne was reportedly restrained by security, furious that the ceremony had been disrupted. Brando, meanwhile, never collected the statue. The gold remained symbolic. The message was the point. But if the statement mattered more than the award, who paid the price for delivering it? History has softened its verdict. In 2022, nearly 50 years later, the Academy formally apologized to Littlefeather for her treatment. The gesture was overdue, but it raised another uncomfortable question. Why did recognition arrive only when the risk was gone? Brando's refusal proved that the Oscars could be used as a platform for protest, but it also revealed the limits of that platform and how quickly Hollywood moves to protect itself when its narrative is challenged. On the 13th of April 1964, at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, Sidney Poitier stepped onto the Oscar stage and quietly shattered one of Hollywood's most enduring racial barriers. Winning Best Actor for Lilies of the Field, Poitier became the first black man to receive the Academy's highest acting honor. The audience rose in a standing ovation, aware that this moment carried national significance. But was this the beginning of true transformation, or the elevation of a single, carefully chosen exception? The timing made the moment impossible to separate from history. Poitier's win came just months after Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech at the height of the civil rights movement. America was confronting its conscience, and Hollywood was being asked to define what progress would look like on screen. Poitier's acceptance speech was brief, dignified, and deliberately restrained. He spoke of gratitude rather than protest, of perseverance rather than anger. Yet, behind that calm exterior lay a lifetime of navigating boundaries few white actors ever had to consider. How much restraint was required just to remain welcome? Throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s, Poitier's roles were constructed with extraordinary care. As a principled doctor confronting racism in No Way Out, an escaped convict defined by moral integrity in The Defiant Ones, and a dignified drifter in Lilies of the Field, Poitier embodied characters designed to reassure white audiences while still retaining enough authenticity to resonate with black viewers. These performances challenged stereotypes, but only within limits the industry found acceptable. Was this a breakthrough in representation, or proof that black excellence had to be carefully filtered to be rewarded? The aftermath revealed the burden of that balance. Poitier became not just a leading man, but a symbol, expected to represent an entire race with every role he accepted. He later described his predicament bluntly. He was playing the kind of black man white audiences were willing to applaud. His success did not open the floodgates. Instead, it isolated him as an exception. 38 years would pass before another black actor won Best Actor. So, what did this historic victory truly change? Did it crack Hollywood's racial wall, or simply demonstrate how exceptional a black performer had to be to approach it at all? Poitier's Oscar endures as a landmark precisely because of its limits, a standing ovation for excellence, delivered by a system that still tightly controlled the terms of acceptance. On the 26th of February 2017, the 89th Academy Awards delivered what many consider the most shocking moment in Oscar history. As presenters, Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway opened the envelope for Best Picture, confusion flickered across the stage, and then a name was read: La La Land. The cast and producers rushed forward. Speeches began. Applause filled the Dolby Theater. It looked like a familiar Oscar ending, a nostalgic love letter to Hollywood itself taking the industry's top prize. But behind the smiles, something was wrong, and as the celebration continued, an unseen correction was already racing toward the stage. How long can a victory last if it was never meant to belong to you? Moments later, the ceremony cracked open in real time. Producer Jordan Horowitz stopped his own acceptance speech and revealed the truth. There had been a mistake. Moonlight had actually won Best Picture. The room fell silent as the La La Land team stepped aside, and the Moonlight filmmakers, stunned, uncertain, and unprepared, took their place. "This is not a joke," Horowitz insisted, holding up the correct card. Live television had just rewritten history. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Moonlight, a small, intimate film about a gay black man's coming of age, represented stories Hollywood had historically marginalized. Its victory over a glossy celebration of Hollywood dreams felt like an overdue correction, but also a fragile one. Why did this recognition arrive only through error? And if the Academy had not been forced to correct itself publicly, would the safer choice have stood unchallenged? The aftermath revealed deeper meaning. The accounting firm issued apologies. Procedures were changed, but the cultural impact lingered. Moonlight became the first film with an all-black cast and the first LGBTQ-centered story to win Best Picture, a milestone made unforgettable by the chaos surrounding it. Hollywood corrected itself on live television, but only after briefly rewarding the film that reflected itself most comfortably. So was this moment a triumph for inclusion, or a reminder that progress often arrives by accident, not intention? In a single, surreal pivot, the Oscars exposed both their power to shape history and their reluctance to let go of what feels safe. For 92 years, one unwritten rule had quietly governed the Academy Awards: Best Picture speaks English. Foreign language films could be celebrated, admired, even honored, but always in their own separate category. The top prize remained firmly reserved for English-language cinema. That rule collapsed on the 9th of February 2020, when Jane Fonda opened the envelope at the 92nd Academy Awards and announced Parasite as Best Picture. The Dolby Theater erupted. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming: disbelief, joy, and a standing ovation that seemed to recognize the magnitude of what had just happened. For the first time in Oscar history, the Academy's highest honor went to a film not spoken in English. But why had it taken nearly a century for this barrier to fall? Directed by Bong Joon-ho, Parasite had already won Best International Feature Film, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Director earlier that night. Yet this final victory carried a different weight. For decades, global masters of cinema, Federico Fellini, Ingmar Bergman, Akira Kurosawa, had reshaped film language itself without ever seeing their work recognized as Best Picture. Excellence had been acknowledged, but never fully embraced. So what made this moment possible now? As the Parasite team celebrated on stage, the Academy attempted to dim the lights, signaling the ceremony needed to move on. The audience refused. Chants of "Up, up" echoed through the theater, demanding the filmmakers be given their moment. It was a rare reversal of power, the room insisting that history be allowed to breathe. Earlier that evening, Bong had jokingly remarked that once audiences overcame the 1-inch-tall barrier of subtitles, they would discover countless great films. The laughter that followed carried an uncomfortable truth. The barrier had never been about language, it had always been about willingness. Parasite's Best Picture win suggested that the Academy might finally be opening itself to a truly global vision of cinema. Yet it also underscored how long that door had remained closed. Was this the beginning of a new era, or a singular breakthrough made possible only because resistance had become impossible? That night, Hollywood spoke Korean, and the world cheered. Whether the Academy would continue listening remained an open question. On the 24th of March, 2002, at the 74th Academy Awards, Halle Berry made history. When her name was announced for Best Actress for Monsters Ball, Berry became the first black woman to win the Academy Award for a leading performance. 74 years of Oscar history had passed before this barrier finally fell. As she stepped onto the stage, Berry was visibly overwhelmed. Her acceptance speech quickly became one of the most emotional in Oscar history. "This moment is so much bigger than me," she said through tears, naming Dorothy Dandridge, Lena Horne, and Diahann Carroll women whose talent had been undeniable, yet whose careers had been limited by an industry unwilling to fully recognize them. For many watching, the moment felt like long overdue recognition. But was this a turning point or a solitary correction? Berry's performance in Monsters Ball was raw and uncompromising. She portrayed Letitia Musgrove, a woman shattered by loss who enters a relationship with a white corrections officer involved in her husband's execution. The role demanded extreme emotional exposure, forcing Berry to strip away glamour and comfort in ways rarely required of previous Best Actress winners. That such a painful, controversial role became the vehicle for this historic first raised difficult questions. Why did breaking this barrier require such visible suffering? In the aftermath, the limits of the breakthrough became clear. Berry's win did not lead to a wave of complex leading roles for black actresses. The category that had finally opened once remained closed again. More than 20 years later, she is still the only black woman to have won Best Actress. What was hailed as a door opening increasingly looked like an exception rather than a transformation. Berry's Oscar moment stands as both a triumph and a sobering reminder. It proved that history could change, and how slowly, how narrowly, that change has been allowed to happen. On the 22nd of February 2009, the 81st Academy Awards delivered one of the most emotionally charged moments in Oscar history. 13 months after his death at just 28 years old, Heath Ledger was awarded Best Supporting Actor for his performance as the Joker in The Dark Knight. When his name was announced, the Dolby Theater rose in a standing ovation that felt less like celebration and more like collective mourning. Ledger's parents and sister accepted the award on his behalf, announcing that the Oscar would ultimately belong to his young daughter, Matilda. The room was silent, attentive, and visibly moved. This was only the second time an acting Oscar had been awarded posthumously, following Peter Finch decades earlier. But the significance of Ledger's win extended beyond tragedy. What exactly was the Academy recognizing in that moment? Loss, brilliance, or something it had previously refused to see? Ledger's Joker was not a typical comic book villain. It was a fully realized character study, unsettling, anarchic, and psychologically precise. His performance shattered expectations about what a superhero film could achieve artistically. Until then, comic book adaptations were largely confined to technical categories, rarely considered vehicles for serious acting recognition. Ledger's win forced a re-evaluation. If greatness could emerge from a genre once dismissed as spectacle, what other boundaries had the Academy been enforcing without justification? The timing made the moment even heavier. Ledger had never seen the full cultural impact of his performance, nor the way it reshaped the industry's perception of blockbuster cinema. His Oscar bridged old and new Hollywood method intensity in a film rooted in popular culture. Yet the applause carried an unspoken sorrow. Recognition had arrived, but far too late for the man who earned it. Ledger became a symbol of both transformation and loss. His win helped legitimize comic book films as potential platforms for serious artistry, altering what could be considered Oscar-worthy. But it also underscored a painful truth. Sometimes the Academy acknowledges innovation only after it is impossible to ignore or after the artist is gone. A brilliant final act, honored in silence. On the 27th of March 2022, the 94th Academy Awards veered off script in a way no one could have predicted. As presenter Chris Rock made a joke referencing Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head caused by alopecia, the room reacted with uneasy laughter. Then Will Smith walked onto the stage and struck Rock across the face. For a split second, viewers around the world wondered if they had witnessed a planned bit. That illusion vanished as Smith returned to his seat and shouted, twice, "Keep my wife's name out your mouth." The Dolby Theater fell into stunned silence. Rock, visibly shaken yet composed, continued the presentation. In nearly a century of carefully managed decorum, the Oscars had never seen a moment like this. When the world's most polished award show becomes raw and unscripted, what does it reveal about the image it works so hard to protect? The shock deepened minutes later. Smith won Best Actor for his performance in King Richard and delivered a tearful acceptance speech about love, protection, and imperfection. He apologized to the Academy and his fellow nominees, but not to Rock. The juxtaposition was surreal. Celebration and condemnation unfolding on the same stage, almost back to back. Could the ceremony still pretend nothing had fundamentally changed? The aftermath was swift and unavoidable. Smith resigned from the Academy and was later banned from attending the Oscars for 10 years. The incident ignited fierce debate about comedy and boundaries, masculinity and violence, race and public accountability. For some, it was a human breaking point broadcast live. For others, it was an inexcusable act that shattered the last illusion of Oscar dignity. This moment didn't just dominate headlines, it redefined them. In exposing how quickly decorum could collapse, the slap revealed the fragility beneath Hollywood's most carefully curated ritual. The Oscars had always been a stage for performance. That night, the performance broke and the consequences became part of history. On the 2nd of March 2014, during the 86th Academy Awards, host Ellen DeGeneres stepped off the stage and into the audience with a smartphone and quietly changed how the Oscars would exist in the digital age. What followed looked spontaneous. Ellen gathering A-list stars, leaning in close, and snapping a group selfie mid-broadcast. Within minutes, the image flooded Twitter, breaking retweet records and briefly overwhelming the site. The photo spread faster than any acceptance speech ever could. Celebrities appeared approachable, playful, almost ordinary. The barrier between Hollywood's most exclusive night and the global audience seemed to dissolve in real time. Ellen predicted it would break Twitter, and it did eventually, becoming the most retweeted image in the platform's history. But was this a genuine cultural moment, or a carefully calibrated performance for a new kind of audience? What made the selfie historically significant wasn't just its virality. It symbolized a shift in power. For decades, the Oscars controlled how stars were seen, framed, distant, untouchable. In one casual image, that hierarchy flattened. The ceremony was no longer just something people watched, it was something they shared. And in an era where relevance is measured in engagement, had social media just become as important as the awards themselves? The aftermath revealed the transformation. The selfie, quietly sponsored by Samsung, signaled the Academy's full embrace of social platforms as central to cultural impact. From radio to television to live streams, the Oscars had always adapted to new media. This time, the adaptation happened inside the show itself. Yet the image also froze a moment in time, capturing who was considered A-list in 2014 and reminding viewers how quickly cultural meaning can shift. That night, the Oscars didn't just honor films, they chased attention, and in doing so, they crossed a threshold from prestige ceremony to viral content engine. The question was no longer who won, but what moment would trend. On the 7th of March 2010, the 82nd Academy Awards marked a milestone that had taken far too long to arrive. When Kathryn Bigelow was announced as Best Director for The Hurt Locker, she became the first woman to win the category in the Academy's history. 82 years after the Oscars began, the glass ceiling finally cracked. But what did that crack actually change? The moment carried added drama. Bigelow was competing against James Cameron, her former husband, whose film Avatar had shattered box office records and reshaped blockbuster cinema. The narrative was irresistible, a small, independently financed war film versus the biggest spectacle Hollywood had ever produced. When Barbra Streisand opened the envelope and declared, "The time has come," the line felt less like ceremony and more like an admission. Bigelow's win challenged assumptions that had long governed Hollywood. She had built her career directing action-driven films in genres traditionally dominated by men, refusing to be boxed into women's stories. In her acceptance speech, she avoided framing the moment around gender. instead dedicating the award to the men and women serving in the military. Was this humility or the quiet pressure to prove that her work, not her identity, deserved recognition? The aftermath exposed a familiar pattern. While Bigelow's victory was historic, it did not immediately transform the industry. Opportunities for women directors remained scarce, especially on large-budget productions. In the years that followed, only a handful of women would join her in the Best Director category, a reminder of how slowly Hollywood recalibrates power. So, was this a turning point, or a carefully contained exception? Bigelow's Oscar proved that women could not only direct at the highest level, but could dominate it. Yet, the fact that it took more than 8 decades and still remains rare reveals how entrenched the barrier truly was. A breakthrough that arrived at last, and a system that changed far more cautiously than the applause suggested. On the 2nd of April 1974, the 46th Academy Awards delivered one of the most unexpected moments in television history. As host David Niven prepared to introduce Elizabeth Taylor, a naked man suddenly sprinted across the stage behind him, flashing a peace sign. The intruder was Robert Opel, a photographer and gallery owner who had slipped backstage by posing as a journalist. The audience gasped. Viewers at home stared in disbelief. Yet Niven, the embodiment of old-school Hollywood elegance, barely missed a beat. With flawless timing, he quipped, "Isn't it fascinating to think that probably the only laugh that man will ever get in his life is by stripping off and showing his shortcomings?" The room erupted in laughter and applause. In seconds, chaos had been neutralized by wit. But was this just a clever joke or a symbolic clash between two eras? The streaking incident occurred during a period of intense cultural upheaval. The Vietnam War was winding down. Watergate was unfolding. Social norms around protest, nudity, and authority were rapidly changing. Opel's naked dash represented the raw provocation of 1970s counterculture, colliding head-on with the Academy's carefully maintained image of refinement and control. Could the Oscars still pretend to be insulated from the cultural revolutions reshaping America? For historians, the moment's power lies less in Opel's act than in Niven's response. Niven represented Hollywood's classical tradition, polished, restrained, impeccably verbal. His perfectly delivered line, whether improvised or prepared, symbolized the establishment reasserting control through sophistication rather than force. The applause was not just for humor, it was relief. Order had been restored. Tragically, Opel's story did not end in notoriety. In 1979, he was murdered during a robbery at his San Francisco gallery. His brief infamy outlived his life, leaving the streaking moment tinged with unexpected melancholy. What began as a prank became a permanent entry in Oscar history, not because of rebellion alone, but because of how calmly the old guard absorbed it. A naked disruption, an unflappable comeback, and a reminder that even Hollywood's most sacred rituals are vulnerable to the chaos of their time. On the 23rd of March 1998, the 70th Academy Awards became the night when excess, ambition, and popular emotion converged. Titanic, directed by James Cameron, arrived already crowned a global phenomenon. It had shattered box office records, crossed the $1 billion mark worldwide, and embedded itself into pop culture through music, imagery, and star power. The only remaining question was not whether it would win, but how completely. By the end of the night, Titanic had claimed 11 Academy Awards, tying the all-time record previously held by Ben-Hur. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Song, a near-total sweep of technical categories. As the statues piled up, inevitability settled over the ceremony. Was the Academy celebrating artistic achievement or surrendering to a cultural tidal wave too large to resist? The defining image came when Cameron accepted Best Director and shouted, "I'm the king of the world." The line, lifted directly from the film, instantly became iconic and controversial. To some, it captured triumph after years of public doubt and industry skepticism. To others, it sounded like unchecked ego, amplified by the sheer dominance of the night. Where is the line between confidence and hubris when success becomes overwhelming? Historically, Titanic mattered because it achieved something rare, complete alignment between mass popularity and Academy approval. Hollywood has long maintained a tension between box office spectacle and awards prestige. Titanic briefly erased that divide. It proved that a lavish, emotionally direct, effects-heavy epic could still be embraced as serious cinema. But was this a lasting reconciliation or a once-in-a-generation exception? In hindsight, the sweep also marked the end of an era. Titanic stands as one of the last original, standalone mega-productions before franchises came to dominate the industry. Its Oscar dominance cemented Cameron's power and reshaped expectations for scale, risk, and reward. That night, the Academy didn't just honor a film, it crowned a moment when Hollywood believed bigger could still mean better. A juggernaut that ruled both the box office and the Oscars and reminded the industry, briefly, of what total consensus looked like. On the 10th of April 1972, the 44th Academy Awards delivered one of the most emotionally charged moments in Oscar history. Charlie Chaplin, absent from the United States for 2 decades, returned to Hollywood to accept an honorary Academy Award. As he stepped onto the stage at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, the audience rose to its feet and did not sit down for 12 full minutes. The ovation was unprecedented. Cameras captured Chaplin visibly overwhelmed, raising his hands in a familiar gesture of gratitude. When he finally spoke, his words were simple and fragile. "This is an emotional moment for me." Words seem so futile, so feeble. But behind the applause lay a far heavier history. Chaplin had left America in 1952 after being targeted during the Red Scare. His visa revoked amid accusations of communist sympathies. Was this celebration really about art or about guilt? Chaplin was not merely a beloved entertainer, he was one of cinema's architects, actor, director, writer, producer, composer. His work had shaped film language itself. Yet the industry he helped build had remained silent as political hysteria pushed him into exile. The honorary Oscar cited the incalculable effect he had on motion pictures, but the moment functioned as something more profound, a public reckoning with Hollywood's own complicity. For historians, the standing ovation represented a collective apology disguised as applause. Many in that room had prospered while others were blacklisted. Chaplin's return offered the industry a rare chance at moral repair. Why did recognition only come once the danger had passed? And why did it take 20 years for Hollywood to admit its mistake? 2 years later, Chaplin would be knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. He died in 1977, having lived long enough to witness his full rehabilitation. His Oscar moment endures not just as a tribute to genius, but as a reminder that institutions often apologize late and loudly when silence is no longer defensible. 12 minutes of applause, 20 years of exile, and a reconciliation that arrived just in time to be remembered. The 95th Academy Awards in 2023 marked a quiet but profound rupture in one of Hollywood's most entrenched prejudices: age. For decades, actresses watched leading roles evaporate after 40, while male counterparts aged into prestige. That night, the narrative shifted. Women over 50 were not honored for lifetime achievement, they were winning for power, range, and relevance. The defining moment came when Michelle Yeoh, at age 60, won Best Actress for Everything Everywhere All at Once. She became the first Asian woman to claim the category. In her speech, Yeoh addressed age directly. "Ladies, don't let anybody tell you you are ever past your prime." Was this a personal triumph or a message aimed squarely at an industry built on expiration dates? The breakthrough didn't stand alone. Jamie Lee Curtis, 64, won Best Supporting Actress for the same film, capping a 5-decade career often dismissed as genre work. Her victory reframed a long-held bias that horror, comedy, and action somehow count less. Meanwhile, Angela Bassett, also in her 60s, earned a nomination for Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, returning to Oscar contention nearly 30 years after portraying Tina Turner. Was this coincidence or a long-delayed correction? What made 2023 historically significant was not just age, but role quality. These women were not playing background figures or symbolic matriarchs. They carried films emotionally and physically, defying assumptions about what older actresses could do on screen. Yeoh's performance demanded martial precision, comic timing, and existential depth, a direct challenge to Hollywood's narrow vision of female longevity. Yet history urges caution. Hollywood has celebrated firsts before, only to retreat. Was this the beginning of structural change or a moment when multiple forces briefly aligned? Global audiences, diverse Academy membership, and stories willing to center older women? The applause suggested progress. The real test would come later. That night, the message was unmistakable. They didn't age out. They broke through. Whether Hollywood listens or forgets will define what this moment ultimately becomes. When The Godfather won Best Picture at the 45th Academy Awards in 1973, the victory marked far more than a single film's triumph. It signaled the Academy's acceptance of a new kind of American cinema, darker, morally complex, and driven by directors rather than studios. Hollywood was changing, and the Oscars were finally admitting it. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, The Godfather had already reshaped popular culture. Its portrayal of organized crime rejected clear heroes and villains, replacing them with loyalty, power, and moral compromise. Violence was intimate, consequences were personal, and the American dream was presented as a corrupted inheritance. Could a film so unapologetically bleak really represent the industry's highest honor? The answer came when producer Albert S. Ruddy accepted the award. Coppola's film also won Best Adapted Screenplay, shared with Mario Puzo, and Best Actor, an honor famously declined by Marlon Brando, whose protest had already transformed the ceremony earlier that night. The Best Picture win completed the statement. New Hollywood had arrived. Historically, this moment legitimized a generation of filmmakers who challenged traditional storytelling. Directors like Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and Robert Altman were pushing cinema toward ambiguity, realism, and personal vision. By honoring The Godfather, the Academy acknowledged that American film no longer needed to be comforting or morally tidy to be great. Was this a bold embrace of evolution or a reluctant concession to undeniable influence? The film's success also shifted power behind the scenes. Paramount had resisted Coppola's choices from casting Brando to the film's shadowy visual style, but the Oscar validated the director's authority. Creative freedom, the industry learned, could produce both cultural impact and commercial success. In retrospect, The Godfather's Best Picture win stands as a hinge point. It bridged classical Hollywood and the modern era, establishing the template for prestige cinema, character-driven, visually distinctive, and unafraid of moral darkness. The family business became cinematic royalty, and the Oscars acknowledged that American film had grown up. Looking across these 15 historic Oscar moments, a clear pattern emerges, one that goes far beyond trophies, speeches, or scandals. The Academy Awards have never been just a celebration of cinema. They have functioned as a cultural mirror, reflecting America's evolving struggles with race, power, gender, age, politics, and identity. From Hattie McDaniel being forced to sit apart in a segregated ballroom, to Parasite breaking the language barrier decades later, these moments chart a slow, uneven expansion of who is allowed to be seen, heard, and honored. Progress came, but almost always late, often reluctantly, and rarely without contradiction. How many decades had to pass before each first was allowed to happen? The Oscars have also served as a battleground. Marlon Brando used rejection as protest. Kathryn Bigelow shattered a gender ceiling that should never have existed. Will Smith exposed how fragile decorum can be when raw emotion breaks through image management. These were not comfortable moments, but history rarely is. What makes these Oscar moments endure is not perfection, but tension. The Academy has repeatedly positioned itself as both gatekeeper and stage, resisting change while simultaneously providing the platform where that change becomes unavoidable. Each breakthrough exposes how much resistance preceded it. Each celebration carries the shadow of those still waiting. That is why the Oscars continue to matter. Not because they always get it right, but because their failures, delays, and contradictions reveal the deeper truths of the industry and the culture it serves. These moments didn't just define Oscar nights, they punctuated American history. And as long as cinema reflects who we are and who we struggle to become, the Oscars will remain more than an awards show. They will remain a record of our unfinished conversation,